Hello, and welcome to the ThinkJSOU webinar series, brought to you by the Office for Strategic Engagement. Today, we are pleased to present a distinguished speaker. This session is unclassified and will be recorded and posted to the JSOU network. Please keep in mind that the views and opinions expressed by all participants do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policy of the U.S. government, Department of Defense, or USSOCOM. If you have questions after this session, please email thinkjsou@jsou.edu.
Good morning. Welcome to another ThinkJSOU. We have Mr. Joseph Simon, the founder and CEO of the Simon Group. And prior to his retirement in 2020, he was the Senior Counterintelligence Advisor to the Department of the Army. He has over 32 years of federal service, serving as a counterintelligence professional within the Department of the Army and at various echelons. He has worked with our interagency partners on counterterrorism and counterintelligence efforts since 9/11. And again, I just want to welcome Mr. Simon to another ThinkJSOU. This is culminating with a number of recent events that have transpired here in the U.S. and abroad, with recent espionage cases being broadcast across the media, recent insider threats and leaks within the Department of the Air Force and DoD, as well as Army. And the reason for this discussion, going back to our latest discussion with Chris Costa on SOF and counterintelligence in the gray zone, Chris had mentioned Army CI reform. So I figured it was necessary for us to have this discussion. And what better person to have this discussion with than Joe, since he was kind of the keystone and spearheaded the Army CI reform effort prior to his retirement. Joe, over to you for some introductions and initial comments.
Mike, good morning. And let me first of all say thank you for the opportunity to collaborate with you on this message in about counterintelligence reform. Very interestingly enough, I had an interview with the Center for Military History about this very topic soon after I retired. So this is the second time I have the opportunity to talk about this. Once in a career, or for some people, a lifetime of reform for Army counterintelligence. So just a little bit about me. As you mentioned, I have 32 years of federal service. I did 10, almost 11 years active duty as a soldier in the United States Army, counterintelligence agent. Started off in 25th Infantry Division, and what a better way to start a CI career in an infantry unit, and then transitioned into the more strategic assignments that Army CI had to offer back in the day. So I transitioned from active duty to a DA civilian, part of a MI civilian career accepted program. You may know what I'm speaking of. I spent a full career in civil service with that program prior to getting promoted to the senior executive level in the Pentagon. So where I was charged with leading the effort to reform Army CI. Once the opportunity presented itself, it was a long time coming, and I look forward to sharing those experiences with you here today. So I retired again, as you mentioned, in October of 2020, middle of the pandemic. Walked out of the Pentagon with my last certificate of participation, if you will, and drove home that day, just thinking, wow, what a journey. But didn't take long for me to figure out that I still wanted to find a way to contribute to the Army, to the national defense mission, and the counterintelligence community across the country. So dabbled in the private sector for a little over a year, and then decided to form and establish the Simon Group, which is exclusively focused on providing counterintelligence consulting, managed services, and technical solutions to both the private sector and the government agencies. My objective is to become the go-to company in the private sector for counterintelligence experience and expertise. The company currently has most, if not all, of the folks affiliated with the Simon Group are all on their second careers. They're all retired, federal agents from across the counterintelligence landscape, U.S. Counterintelligence community. That's kind of what brings me here today to talk about a little bit of how I got here and talk about CI reform.
Awesome. Again, Joe, it's been a pleasure working with you. Again, thank you for your service. I mean, 32 years does not come lightly, and it has been a tremendous effort. And then you continue to serve this nation. And that's what we need, is people willing to stand up for the values that our founding fathers based this nation on, and be able to protect it from all adversaries, foreign and domestic. So before we get started on U.S. Army recent CI reform, can you provide some historical context and background on how the U.S. Army CI was created, its structure up to this point, and then we'll get into the depth of the discussion.
So a little bit before our time, the counterintelligence Corps of Intelligence Police was formed back in 1917. World War I believe, was the time frame. It was subordinate to a newly created military intelligence division within the U.S. Army. And in 1944, during World War II, it was renamed and reformed. They actually had a reform effort during World War II, 1944, and it was reformed and called now the Counterintelligence Corps, the CIC. So from that point to up till about 1974, the CIC was the counterintelligence organization for the U.S. Army, but then it was disbanded in the 70s because of I'm sure a lot of people know about what occurred in the 70s and the 60s from, I think, the Church and Pike commissions. So CIC was disbanded and then reorganized, restructured under the intelligence reform effort across the U.S. intel community and the U.S. Army specifically. So then it was, I believe that's when U.S. Army INSCOM was established. The counterintelligence forces were aligned under the different MI brigades or groups across the world, and kind of led us to where we were up until the Army Counterintelligence Command was established last summer, actually. So that's a little bit of the history.
You look at Army counterintelligence from World War II, going through the Cold War, the spy versus spy game, and you look at today's landscape with strategic competition. You look at how, from an integrated deterrence perspective, counterintelligence is being promoted by senior leaders. The emphasis is being placed on there. Everything from Director Ray at the FBI doing strategic outreach with academia, with the private sector, and publicly acknowledging the fact that this espionage and these different national security crimes, from international terrorism to sedition to subversion to sabotage, are taking place not only here in the homeland, but also abroad. The number of news articles I've read recently about arrests made over in Europe from a counterintelligence perspective, it definitely resembles the era of counterintelligence from World War II and the Cold War. So can you tell the audience and listeners why the U.S. Army counterintelligence has undergone this massive reform effort recently?
I would say it all goes back to a time frame, maybe 2016, 2017. I recall the National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy coming out. The Secretary of Defense at that time issued a memorandum to all the service secretaries across the Department of Defense, talking about areas where the services in the department needed to increase their lethality in certain mission areas. And one of them was clearly identified as increasing the lethality of the counterintelligence programs across the department. So when I read that, and many of my colleagues across the other military department CI organizations, so NCIS and OSI, and other CI organizations across the Department of Defense, were like, what does this really mean? What does lethality mean as it pertains to counterintelligence? But we weren't really sure at first, but we kind of waited for further guidance to come down from senior leaders in the building and in the Pentagon. And strangely enough, like less than a week or two later, the sitting G2, who was newly appointed at that time as the G2 for the Army, asked me to come down to their office and ask me, what is this lethality memo about? What does it mean for us? And I said, I really can't tell you, but I mean, we'll find out, I guess. And sure enough, there was an entire list of, I think it was like 20 to 25 questions that came down from the Secretary's office, Secretary of Defense's office, specific to the counterintelligence programs across the, I'm going to refer to the MDCOs, as I mentioned, the military department, CI organizations. And of course, the G2 being the lead for Army counterintelligence within Department of the Army, got these questions. We need to answer these we have less than 24 hours in Pentagon. In the Pentagon world, that's not a very long lead time to answer a bunch of RFIs and taskers from the Secretary of Defense's office. So a lot of the questions were really good questions. Whoever developed them, they really had a very good, clear vision of what we needed to figure out to assess the CI programs across the department. And essentially, after answering those questions, the G2 at the time, was like, wow, when I identified just the simple number of counterintelligence, one of the questions was, how many counterintelligence agents do you have in Department of the Army? When I shared the number with the G2 at the time, he was just like, wow, how many does Air Force have? How many does Navy have? And we clearly were the biggest, we had the biggest population of CI agents in the Army. And then the next logical question was, well, where are they and what are they doing? How are they supporting the CI mission? And that was a more complex response. And it took some time to walk the dog and share the real deal of what the number of agents in the Army formation was doing across the world. So needless to say, at that time, there was a lot going on in the building as far as CI and about modernization. The Department of Defense's modernization, the Department of the Army, as you know, Army Futures Command was just established or was about to be established, establishing cross-functional teams that will develop the next generation, weapon systems, vehicles, whatever the case, 7 or 8 different cross-functional teams. And we knew the adversary would be coming after it. It was no secret that our adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they're all coming after this technology. And we knew that in accordance with the National Defense Strategy, it was time to pivot counterintelligence out of the 20 plus years of the global war on terror. And, I believe CI was misutilized, repurposed in so many different ways. But we had to do what we had to do after 9/11 and totally understand why we did what we did. So, but it was time now to pivot Army counterintelligence at a minimum to help better focus protecting the modernization, the biggest modernization for the Army in 40, 50 years. So that's kind of what drove the CI reform discussion and the decision of the G2 to make it. And I know this was very questioned. Oh, is it really? But the G2 made it his number one priority. And when that was communicated to the military intelligence community and the Army, that really said a lot. And the G2 had a very good understanding of why it was important to make CI reform. His words, let's call it CI reform. I've heard rebalance. I've heard reorganization. I've heard it was reform, and that's the bumper sticker that we stuck to. But why he chose to make it his number one priority, and got the leadership, the Army leadership behind this, talking about the Secretary of the Army at the time and the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time having almost weekly engagements with them about counterintelligence and why it's important. And all of a sudden they cared about all of the ongoing investigations and a lot more visibility and a lot more updates to both the chief and the secretary. As a matter of fact, the secretary, I'll never forget this, the secretary's front office called the front office of the G2 and said, hey, the secretary is headed down to speak to Mr. Simon about counterintelligence. Everybody lost their mind because the Secretary of the Army was walking down to my little foxhole, a little bit bigger than a jail cell office in the Pentagon, and came in and closed the door, and we had a discussion about counterintelligence. So it was very evident to me that CI reform was important, not just to the G2, not just to the counterintelligence community, but to the Secretary of the Army, and of course the Secretary of Defense. So that really kind of prompted the whole CI reform. That's kind of like the precursor, if you will, of things lining up to lead, the first major CI reform effort in 40 plus years.
No, I remember when the Army came out and said, hey, they're going to conduct the CI reform. Everyone was curious what it was, what it was going to look like, how it was going to impact everyone, especially here within the SOF community, where I had been residing for the preponderance of my CI career. We were like, okay, how does that affect us? How does that going to change training and education? How is that going to impact career progression if you're outside the traditional Army CI structure? So definitely anticipated it. It was a long process, and the fact that it just kind of materialized last year, right before I retired, shows the deliberation and the due diligence that was placed on making sure that it was done correctly. I noticed the Senate report titled the CI Reform Act of 2000. I know we talked previously, didn't really have much of an impact, maybe just gave more emphasis on the fact that CI needed to reform, not only within the Army, but across all the departments, and that the emphasis needed to be placed on CI integration and getting back to the fundamentals of the CI mission and functions. So some of the catalysts that you talked about was the Secretary's emphasis on Futures Command. Can you elaborate on the threat to the research, development, acquisition activities within the Army and how that helped promote this reform effort?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, just to touch on the CI Reform Act of 2000, I do want to touch on that real quick, and then we'll come back to your question about Army Futures Command. So if you remember, as a longtime CI expert and professional, the Win Ho Lee case with Department of Energy back in the late 90s, I think it was Los Alamos National Laboratory. That really was a kind of like a shot over the bow and awakening for CI to say, look at what our adversaries are doing to come and steal our technology. Well, we were ramping up back in the late 90s and early 2000, the year 2000, to get counterintelligence focused on protecting our modernization, protecting our intellectual property, our research and development efforts. And we were on the cusp of kicking that off across the counterintelligence community, the national CI community. But then, September 11th completely took us off that glide path, and the focus quickly shifted. So for 20 plus years, we were all focused on a less sophisticated adversary in, constant rotations inside and out of Afghanistan and Iraq and around the global war on terror around the world. CI, from an Army perspective, I can't speak for the other services, but I suspect the same is true. Our focus was counterterrorism, and so getting back to now the national defense strategy and pivoting, focusing on great power competition and the stand-up of Army Futures Command, we knew, the national CI enterprise, if you will, we knew what the adversary, and I'll say it, I'm not afraid to say it, is China. China was eating our lunch and still is. I think the number was on average, $400 to $600 billion of theft of intellectual property every year. The FBI's investigations on espionage cases involving China rose exponentially, as well as Army counterintelligence. I won't say the numbers, but we noticed a significant uptick and increase in Chinese-related investigations. So we all knew it's no longer, as you mentioned in your introductory comments, no longer spy versus spy. Sending their spies to steal war plans or getting inside, headquarters of major Army units. The focus has been for quite some time stealing our intellectual property and our research and development activities or progress. And that was really our number one focus when we talked about reforming Army CI. We had to talk about what are we reforming for, how we need to align ourselves. One of the things we realized was we were out of position. And that is, we were in a Cold War posture. The structure of our organization was a Cold War relic, multiple layers from an agent to decision makers, stovepiped operations, units across the footprint, across the landscape. And we said, we need to organize for combat now. We need to reorganize to help create a more agile, more aggressive, more robust CI apparatus across the Army with one set of priorities, with one set of standards, and just basically one way of doing counterintelligence. After recognizing being out of position, and what I say, I mean, physically, we had offices all over the country that have been there for decades. And we did some, why is this office here? What are they there to protect? What are they there to counter? So we really looked at trying to realign ourselves closer to where the centers of gravity would be for Army Futures Command and other, acquisition elements across the Army.
So you mentioned a number of things, and I was jotting down some notes here. So 20 plus years of counter VEO, counterterrorism efforts after 9/11 definitely put us on a glide path towards a different type of fight. So some of the other things that transpired right after 9/11 was the emphasis and focus on human and on security related functions. A lot of times that CI professionals were taken out of their primary functions, primary roles, and told to go do these other tasks. Can you elaborate a little bit on the impact that had on the force and why it's taken so long to re-educate, reinvigorate CI within the Army and the DoD at broad, and then also talk a little bit about how you went from a very hierarchical structure, rigid bureaucratic management practices, and went to more like a General McChrystal's team of teams concept where you empower down, you actually trust those agents on the ground to uphold those values, uphold those standards, and do what's right, even though they might be one or two deep in a team or in a field office, and know that they're going to go out and represent the Army the way they've been trained and educated on.
Yeah, so I'll hit really quick. I almost interrupted you because I felt like I need a knee-jerk reaction to respond to one thing, and the impact that it had. I would say the impact on the old way of doing business and the old model. It had a huge impact on retention, and when I say retention, I'm talking about specifically the enlisted 35 Limas that the Army had a hard time holding on to. And I hope it's fixed now. But when you saw the retention rates of the 35 Lima population, specifically the E5, E6 level, it was very telling as to why the misutilization, them not doing their jobs, soldiers reclassifying from a previous MOS at the E5 level, coming in and becoming an agent, and then being assigned in a position, of responsibility, and have never, doesn't have any experience, or maybe they're put in a position where they're not doing CI, and it just, immediately takes the shine off of being an agent. So that, what do bright, aggressive and ambitious people do? They vote with their feet. So we had a really difficult time retaining good talent in the MOS. So that was a huge discussion with Army leadership and the G2. And the G2 asked, why are we having this issue? Why are we not able to retain the talent and retain the NCO ranks? And I said, sir, if we don't fix CI, we're going to continue having this problem. So for me, it was a very, very motivating incentive, or why I put everything I did into this. Because number one, I was an NCO. I got out of the Army as a sergeant first class, transitioned to as a DA civilian. But I think about all those NCOs that joined the counterintelligence program to do counterintelligence things, to do agent things. And they weren't doing agent things. They were doing, S2 things. They were doing human things. They were doing security things. They were doing checking CAC cards at major installation things. So I would often go to Fort Huachuca and speak at a graduating class of new agents. And then when I was there, I'd always stop by the NCO Academy. That was home for me. And I'd always ask the sergeant major, hey, I'd love to have an audience with the students. I know you guys have a lot going on, but he always made the time and just sat and talked about the reform efforts. And I can't tell you, Mike, how many really sharp NCOs would come up to me afterwards and say, hey, sir, thanks for the pizza. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the pep talk. But I'm getting out. And I don't think this is going to happen. Everybody's saying this isn't going to happen. And I said, hey, just please give it some time. Be patient. You're doing great for your career. You're doing great things. And change is coming. So for me, the huge part of reform was to help, obviously, to fix. I don't say fix because saying that I was saying that Army CI was broken. That's not the case. I wanted to reform and evolve Army CI to get it to where the retention would not be an issue anymore. That NCOs would be re-enlisting and breaking down doors to get into the MOS. That was one of the things that motivated me so much. So that kind of drove a lot of the why for me personally. Aside from the importance of CI across the Army, but helping get the MOS healthy again. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's like now, but I hear good things. I hear things are moving in a positive direction.
Was talking about General McChrystal's team of teams concept and how he believed in empowering down, believed in those open lines of communication, being able to make sure that it doesn't matter if it's the lowliest private in a staff office or on the battlefield, has the ability to reach back, communicate what their perspectives are, what they see on the ground. And if it's relevant and change needs to happen, then it's taken seriously versus these hierarchical management stovepipes and bureaucracies that historically have been created.
Right. Yeah. So Team of Teams, I read the book. It was a good book. I will say this, this may not be a part of the response or getting after your question, but I do want to highlight that when I was given the task to reform Army counterintelligence, this was not going to be accomplished alone, obviously. So building a coalition of the willing. We've heard that before. I think that goes back to the Gulf War, right? The coalition of the willing. Building the team of teams was critical for me, because the vision that we had, we as in the senior level individuals that were talking about CI reform, including the G2, and the vision that he had, this wasn't going to get done without having a coalition of the willing and stakeholder buy-in. So I began a very, very aggressive outreach effort to the national CI community. And that was very easy because we used to have a once a quarter national CI policy board meeting that NCSC hosted once a quarter, the National CI and Security Center. And, going around the table, going around the horn, I would talk about what I was tasked to do. And all the senior executives from all of the U.S. government counterintelligence agencies were in that room. And they were all really pleased to hear that the Army had made the decision to do this, because they understood the Army to be the biggest, and the Army is the biggest counterintelligence organization in the U.S. government, with counterintelligence authorities that they have. I know DCSA would say that they are the largest, but a specific counterintelligence organization, U.S. Army, has by far the largest number of agents. So building that team of teams started at the national level, and it went down all the way down to the brigade level. We went and traveled around and visited with the various COCOMs and the ASCCs and the MI brigades, the ForceCom elements, and getting them all on board. At least that's what they said to my face at the time, that they were on board. But naturally, there was a little bit of resistance going on behind the scenes. Everybody saw this as they're coming to take our agents away from us. So building the team of teams was critical, and the stakeholders, and great partners at the INSCOM headquarters and the AKICA and across the CI footprint in the Army. So without that, we would have never have accomplished what we did, because we brought in all the folks that realized this was going to be a once in our career opportunity to make a change that's gonna hopefully last for the next 40 years for Army CI. And the guidance, that getting to the point about the lowest level and how the structure came to be, the structure, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the guidance I was given was, we need to have a flat organization to be more agile, get more agents in the field, less bureaucracy sitting at headquarters at the company, the battalion, the brigades. Let's get all the badges we can in the field, and down to the lowest level, agents on the ground. They had to know that they had the support, number one, from their leadership, that they're going to do their job and they're going to do it well. And we had some really tremendous talent in the organization as we piloted the concept, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, that was the guidance I was given. Make it a flat structure, more agile, and everybody moving to the same beat of the drum. And that included, talking to some of the agents that were in the field, they couldn't believe how things changed literally with the flip of a switch, and putting the right leader in charge with the right vision, the right priorities, and it turned out much better than we could have ever hoped for.
That does kind of bring us on to the next question, which is, so when you look at the Army Counterintelligence Command, ACIC, the resemblance and differences from its fellow MDCOs, OSI, Office of Special Investigations, and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS. You kind of alluded to the fact that the Army is much larger, so to scale, there's going to be some differences right there, but how OSI, NCIS are structured in comparison to how ACI is structured, what are some of the limitations that ACI has in comparison to its sister counterparts and the other services, and ultimately why the Army chose to go with the structure that it did?
So let me start by saying great partnerships with OSI and NCIS. They were there with me through thick and thin. We constantly engage at the senior level on a weekly basis for coffee, for whatever purpose. We would get together at a minimum once a week just to kind of share each other's, share our thoughts and what was going on in our individual formations, because they too, and their service secretaries also were tasked to look at their CI programs by way of that memorandum from the secretary back in 2017, 2016. And so is the structure, when you look at, and that was a question of the G2 at the time. How are the other organizations established? How is OSI established? How is NCIS established? I actually got the G2 to actually leave the office, get in a car, and leave the Pentagon. It was like a field trip for him because he doesn't get an opportunity to leave the building very much. We went down to visit OSI and NCIS, and this was all pre-coordinated, of course, months in advance, and with the challenging schedules that everybody has. And they kind of outlined their different structures, how they're situated, where they're assigned, their presence overseas, things of that nature. And the G2 was very, very appreciative of that, because it gave him an opportunity to see what others are doing. And I won't forget the ride back to the building. The comment was, "Hey, they're great, but we're going to be better. We're going to take the best of both and find a way to build the future of our CI organization." So really good exposure for the G2 to meet with. That's the first time a G2, and I dare anybody to fact check me, any G2 taking the time to go meet with the director of NCIS and the commanding general of OSI. That was a big deal, and time very well spent. So when we were doing our mission analysis of what a structure should look like for the Army CI Command, I mean, we knew there was going to be a reform, a command, an organization. We didn't have the details, but we had some guidance on what it should look like. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it needs to be flat. It needs to be led by experts in counterintelligence. And it wasn't a knock on any one, population of people in the military or civil service. But if you're going to lead counterintelligence, and if you're going to empower down to the lowest level, we must have counterintelligence experts in the field making those decisions, because we actually got policy and exceptions to policy to power down authorities usually held at the 2-star level, and empowering those down, pushing those authorities down to a lower level. So the structure had to taking that into consideration, we had to put people in those positions that were comfortable in making those decisions based on risk, and based on mission, and based on authorities. So we came out with the idea of, hey, let's have a regional special agent in charge at the GS-15 level in counterintelligence. That is pretty senior. There's only one or two at the SES level, JSOU level, and that I was one of them, and there was one also at the 902nd at the time, the 902nd. So the decision was, we needed to have let's take a little bit from the way OSI is structured, and let's take a little bit from how NCIS is structured, and that is, we looked at OSI structure with some regional construct, and then we looked at NCIS with civilian leadership in their. I mean, it's 100% civilian. NCIS, I believe they're taking on some active duty now in certain cases, but we kind of took a hybrid. We took a structure like OSI with a commanding general at the top of the organization, with an executive director or an SES level to advise, and then the regional construct. And for Army CI Command, that was the design. And then at the regional level, you have a GS-15 in charge. How did we get there? The decision after we got the guidance, after our visit to OSI and NCIS, I was directed, come back to me with some courses of action, and we did. We brought in a bunch of stakeholders from across the globe, and we locked ourselves down in a room for a week, and we came out with what we thought was the best course of action, but presented the G2 with 3 courses of action. He directed the one that obviously was established But before doing that, he said, "Hey, how do we kick the tires on this? How do we make sure we're not breaking it and making it worse than we don't want to leave it worse than we found it kind of approach." So I said, sir, we could pilot this. We could run a pilot for 90 days, 6 months, maybe. Turned out to be probably a little closer to a year plus. But he said, "Okay, well, tell me more. Where do you think we should pilot this?" Without hesitation, I said Huntsville, Alabama. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, everything we've been talking about as far as reform and the why we need to reform. You look at what's going on at Huntsville and all the R&D, all the technology, advancements and Army Futures Command presence there, and all the other PEOs that are there. We knew that Huntsville was a very target-rich environment for our adversaries." And I said, let's test it, at the highest level, highest threat level we can. And it just so happened we had the kind of like the perfect storm, if you will. We had the right personalities in place as well, the right expertise, and with one flip a switch, we stood up a regional pilot. We called it Region 1, just for the terms of the pilot. And with the guidance and the guidance and the priorities that the G2 laid out for this region to kind of test it and make sure this is exactly what we need, that region, with a few personality changes and a few, personnel changes and authorities given to that regional special agent in charge, they completely flipped the script, man. They did tremendous things. I mean, it was evident within the first 90 days of the activity that was occurring, the proactive counterintelligence, I like to call it, that was occurring. The lack of the need to go through 3 or 4 layers of mother may I, or asking for permission from people who don't have the authority to say no. We powered down authorities down to that regional special agent in charge, and they just built an amazing team, and they understood the spotlight was on them. No doubt, they understood the spotlight was on them, but they also understood this was the opportunity that many of them have been waiting for. Certainly in our generation of CI special agents, and they just nailed it. We had them come brief their output, their accomplishments at the quarterly update to the G2 and the senior leaders of the Army, and they just completely blew them away with the great things that they were doing. The motivation of all the agents, young agents that were now doing CI, that were really, quite frankly, not doing CI to the fullest extent as they could previously. Literally just by changing a moniker, changing a sign on the front door, and putting someone in charge with the right stuff, really kind of demonstrated that we had the right approach, we had the right solution or course of action for the future. So that's kind of why the why the decision was made for the structure that we proposed, and that is the regional construct with a GS-15 CI expert at that level, managing and directing the day-to-day activities, all in accordance with the same priorities of the senior leader of the organization. So that's kind of how we got where we did.
I definitely like the regional construct. I definitely like the fact that everyone's focused on the SEC Army's priorities, because it takes away I've got to come up with a vision, or I've got to come up with how I'm going to institute it. It's now I'm just taking their priorities and I'm applying it to my respective region, and then looking at those gaps and seams between the regions for those collaborative efforts that can be done mutually between multiple regions or with the interagency and the IC or our foreign partners. So I sit there and I look at that, and then I see how we've changed the structure, but from an education standpoint, what has changed within the Army counterintelligence education of its new agents and across as it continually develops its agents over time with more advanced courses? I know we went from back in the early 2000s, SIATA, subversion and espionage directed against the United States Army, awareness briefings, to threat awareness and reporting program, TARP briefs, and the counterintelligence probationary program, bringing that back during my time, and the heavy focus on the radicalization, especially after the Fort Hood shooting with Nidal Hassan, and trying to weed out that Islamic radicalization and that violent extremist radicalization. Now that we're focused back on integrated deterrence and strategic competition against our peers, where they are heavily influencing our cleared defense contractors, our supply chains, and trying to get left of theft, how are we changing our education of the next generation?
Yeah, so great question. And I would say this all ties into line of effort number 4 in CI reform, and that was the talent management line of effort. So CI reform was more than just about a line and block chart and who's in charge and who's not in charge. The talent management aspect of CI reform to me was the most important, because without, I mean, you could have any line and block chart in any organization, and that could change in one command cycle, really. But the investment that you need to make in your agents and analysts and support staff, that's the most important to me. So we developed a line of effort number 4, and part of that was education. And back, I want to say in 2016, we signed an MOU, I forget, forgive me, it's been a minute, with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers at Glencoe, Georgia. So historically, Army CI agents had an opportunity to go to CITP for the basic criminal investigator training program on a standby basis, or cancellation. And I remember as a civil servant, when I was assigned to a joint terrorism task force back in 2003, I really wanted to go to FLETC, but they said there were no seats available. And every time a seat would become available, mission would dictate that I not attend, and I stick, focus on the mission. So it was kind of like onesies and twosies here and there, but we ended up, I got the support of the time, at the time, the G2X, my boss in the Pentagon, to enter into a relationship with FLETC and guaranteeing, I think, 30 seats a year. I think it's doubled, maybe tripled by now. But we are now a partner agency at FLETC, where we put some skin in the game. We have an instructor, maybe 2 now, who knows, maybe more than that, and increase the throughput of Army CI special agents through FLETC. Now, a lot of people will say, well, we're not law enforcement, we don't need to be going to FLETC. I would say that it would be a healthy debate, but I believe I would win that debate. And that is, we had to get our agents trained and baselined in the same training as our partner agencies that we are. In most cases, you talk about the counterintelligence task forces now with the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, working side by side with NCIS, working side by side with OSI, and heck, with our sister agency, Army CID. I felt it was important for our agents to get that baseline understanding, because I knew, working in an FBI task force, there were things that I did not know and I was not aware of. Simply from a pure officer safety perspective, going to do an interview and going to do, whatever task it is, there are things that I knew were missing from our curriculum at Fort Huachuca. And, great course, but the course was a little dated as well. So bottom line is, the CI reform line of effort 4 focused on professionalizing our workforce, our agents, our analysts, and support staff, but specifically getting that partnership at FLETC was critical, because I had the vision, the hope of having CITP as the baseline training for all of our agents, and then go on to a follow-on at Fort Huachuca for these Army counterintelligence specific follow-on course, much like OSI has and NCIS, and every federal agency for that matter has their own agency specific follow-on after the CITP. I don't know where that is, and that's okay. The Army keeps rolling along, but the idea of our agents attending law enforcement course, there are those that felt we're not law enforcement. Army CI is not law enforcement. And then you have to help educate them on the fact that we investigate national security crimes under Title 18 U.S. Code. And, and again, they only knew what they only knew. And they thought, oh, we're all analysts, or we're all intel collectors, so after you explain it to them and you walk the dog and explain to them that, no, your agents are actually here to investigate and prove crimes against the United States Army under these specific statutes, then they start to get it. So part of this, we can't talk about the training without another major issue, a major supporting element, and that was there's a lack of legislative language or statutes that give us the same law enforcement authority. I say us, give Army counterintelligence at the time the lack of a statutory authority for law enforcement in investigating national security crimes. So part of CI reform also was a legislative proposal that we wrote. Our team put together a legislative proposal to add Army Counterintelligence Command, specifically civilian agents of the Army Counterintelligence Command, to add us to the legislative or to the statutory statutes to include us at the time, us with Army CID, NCIS, and OSI as federal law enforcement. So that was a 2-3 year in itself, 2 or 3 year effort. There were a lot of people telling me that it couldn't be done, and a lot of people saying it would never leave the building. But it did get done. It did leave the building, and I believe it was enacted in the NDAA this FY. So nothing happened overnight. Let me put it that way. Everything had a long journey to get to where it's at. But the training, the training and the mindset I felt was very important for our agents to understand why they're there, what they're investigating. It's not investigate just to investigate. You're investigating to prove a crime has been committed or is being committed, and getting that FLETC flavor and baseline, that kind of foundational training, I felt was very important. And so did everybody else. I wasn't alone. Everybody agreed. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it definitely did. I know one of the instructors there at CITP, a very good friend of mine, and both works the soft side and also works the Army Counterintel side. So in his day job. So I sit there and I look at it, and then I sit there and I look at the Joint Force, and I see, okay, how Army is a subset of the Joint Force, how our doctrine has shifted from service-specific activities to, okay, how are we going to work collaboratively in that joint operating domain, and that as a joint warfighting function. So what is the Joint Force, what should the Joint Force expect from ACIC in the form of CI support in the future, based off of the reform efforts?
Yeah, great question. So in my outreach and my charm campaign, charm offensive during the course of CI reform, going out to visit all the COCOM commanders and ASCC commanders, ACOM commanders, one of the first questions out of their mind or their mouth when I mentioned CI reform was, "Oh, you're coming to take my agents out of my theater, or you're coming to take my agents away." And the response is that absolutely not. We are not looking to take anything away from your theater. What we are doing is we want to give you better trained, more agile, more responsive, retained, I say trained and retained workforce. The idea of not being able to retain 35 Limas across the board impacts the warfighter. Literally, when you talk about the MI brigades and the fill rate of the 35 Limas being at a certain percentage, a very unpleasant percentage fill rate, that impacts the readiness of that combatant commander. That could be debated, I'm sure, but I always feel counterintelligence is absolutely an enabler or a very important, capability in the theater. There's only so much capacity. So telling them that they're going to get a better trained workforce, they're going to get a retained, the fill rate's going to be better, which helps the readiness, more agile, more responsive to your requirements. And oh, by the way, something that I observed with, my colleagues in OSI and NCIS, if there was a need somewhere for more agents, for whatever reason, that's one phone call. That's one phone call from the Secretary of the Navy to the Director of NCIS. And that was a done deal. I mean, the CI force structure, the way it is, and I mean, it still is, once and if the final phases of CI reform come to fruition, they're all forces aligned in gift map to the different COCOMs. So the ability for you to leverage a counterintelligence workforce under one-star command, and if there's a surge needed, I believe that one star can make it happen without having to go through, we talk about the process of RFFs all the time, Mike. There's a lot more flexibility that command can help. I think of Defender 2020 as an example. I just so happened to be briefing the ASCC commander back in 2019, who is now the UCOM commander, and on CI reform, and he's a little skeptical at first and didn't think, why are you coming to take my CI assets away? So after explaining, when you look at Defender 2020 and the requests for forces and all the support you're going to need, both here in Europe and back in CONUS, that could be just one organization. That's one community, that's one conversation, from a 4-star to a 1-star, and say, hey, this is the kind of support I'm looking for Defender 2020. I have every reason to believe that 1-star is going to do everything they can to help satisfy that COCOM requirement or the ASCC commander. So the joint force, we don't do anything alone anymore. Everything is in a joint effort. Over the last 20 plus years, every conflict, every war, every major military action has been a joint effort. So I would say, the CI command as it's established now, and hopefully if the rest of it, phase 2 and phase 3 come to fruition, you're going to have a much more robust counterintelligence force for the Army that can provide the value and the impact that the warfighters are going to be looking for.
Well, so that brings up another good question. When you're talking to those commanders and you're trying to explain to them, okay, you're going to be able to have one belly button to push or one person to look in the eye and say, hey, I need this. But when that one commander is sitting there looking globally and saying, okay, how do I weigh my options? How can I reposition my forces without being detrimental to ongoing investigations or ongoing CI activities across the globe? Is that feasible? Is that in the realm of possible? Because as we look at the global threats from China, Russia, Iran, some of them are centralized, regional, but they have a huge reach, especially now in cyberspace. And how is the Army going to be able to ensure that priority mission for the Secretary of the Army, which is RDA and futures, is not decremented at the first sign of a combatant commander or ASCC commander saying, hey, I need more CI, when they haven't been properly utilizing them, as we've heard over the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I that's not one that I'm willing to, I don't know that that's someone I want to take on. But I would say it's a delicate balance. And, again, the CI command as it stands right now, if you think about it, is really just, and I say just because it's a significant number, but it's really what was the 902nd MI group, and maybe a few pieces here and there. So for the most part, the MI brigades that under INSCOM, the theater MI brigades, they still have their CI assets. They still have their CI resources. Now that was my information is dated, but the intent was all CI assets would be under the CI command. That still may be the case. I don't know. Again, I departed in 2020 and have never knocked on the door asking any more questions or, hey, how are things going? So that I believe those COCOM commanders still will get their theater requirements answered by the forces apportioned to them by the MI brigades, the INSCOM MI brigades. So they're really not going without. They're not doing without. Would they be left, wanting more? Maybe, and maybe that's where the brigadier general in charge of the CG of Army CI Command says, hey, you know what, we're gonna help out because this is a real big deal. We need to help where we can, but we're not going to pull off resources from our significant ongoing investigations and operations and support to all of the different modernization efforts here in the United States or wherever they may be. So that's I guess a bureaucratic response for it all depends on the situation, and that's why people get paid the big bucks at the senior level to make those decisions when you gotta pull off people off a mission here to go support another mission over there, and that's going to be a constant recurring theme to deal with.
And I'm glad you kind of ended on that that topic, because CI is a leader's challenge. It is up to leaders to assume that risk. CI informs that risk and informs how they can mitigate that risk through various activities and functions of CI. However, it is ultimately up to those commanders, up to those senior leaders to accept that risk. So, and you had previously mentioned the fact that ACIC right now is comprised predominantly of the 902nd and some of those other ancillary CI capabilities within the Army that doesn't reside within FORSCOM or within the SOF enterprise. So that brings me to kind of our final question, which is, how can USSOF CI professionals, Army CI professionals, as well as those other Joint Force CI professionals within the SOF enterprise, effectively integrate and partner with ACIC field offices and CI professionals across the globe to really impose cost against the fee and to help show a mutually supportive and collaborative effort and a unified front? We sit here within the SOF enterprise, and we use the R2P, recognize, report, and partner moniker. And the recognized piece is understanding, okay, what are those CI investigative triggers or incidents that need to be passed on to the MDCO, or those operational capabilities from an offensive side, because we understand both of those reside within the services and are tasked the services to really conduct those activities per law and DoD's policy. And so we sit there and say, okay, we recognize when those incidents or those opportunities present themselves, and then we report it via approved channels to those MDCOs, ACI being one of them, and then we offer to partner. And at least within the SOF enterprise, our value proposition to ACIC and to those CI professionals at the regional field offices is, by partnering with us, you don't have to provide as much capability or capacity to handle that. You have equivalently trained, educated CI professionals from within the Army that are assigned to those SOF units that know what the SEC Army's priorities are and can help you action it and give you the placement and access within that formation to help you navigate effectively and efficiently your investigative or operational activities so as to be conducted in a more timely and expedient yet professional manner. So from your perspective, when you set out to change and reform the Army counterintelligence structure, what should SOF look at from ACIC in this current transition period while they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do with the force common USSOF formations?
Yeah, so let me just start off by saying I've always been a firm believer in partnerships, relationships. Anybody that's known me over my career, that's how you get stuff done. The relationships that you develop over the course of a career, understanding each other's, pain points, in each organization and how to help each other. That comes with time and with, through relationships. I'm a firm believer in strength in numbers. There's strength in numbers. And when you look at what our adversaries are doing to us on a day-to-day basis, we are outnumbered. And, in the words of a former boss of mine, the building's on fire, and, I want to be very cautious about what I communicate here because I'm no longer in the position I was. But if someone were to ask me my opinion or recommendation on how to get the CI forces within the SOF community executing that R2P concept, which I think is really, really a great idea and a great concept. Number one, the bureaucrat in me says, well, maybe somebody at the senior level within the USSOCOM or USSOF should try to establish an MOA or MOU with the CI command. And something similar, Mike, we used to have when I was assigned to the 66th MI Brigade back in 2012 to 2015, there was an MOU between INSCOM and FORCECOM. And, the old no soldier at rest kind of thing, which basically we were able to get CI agents in FORCECOM units to come work in, INSCOM field offices you had new agents out there that just graduated from the agents course. They got to get through their SIP program and get qualified and certified and actually do CI. So we actually had somebody from the 173rd, a CI agent, come over to work in the Vicenza field office. So there's ways to address these concerns or these aspects of how do we work together and how do we fit in each other's kind of space and cohabitate. I would say number one is you should look for a way to like a governing document at the general officer level, an agreement to say, hey, this is how we'd like to integrate and help where we can. Obviously, SOCOM has a huge train man equip mission, service like train man equip mission as the other services do. And you only have so much capacity as well, and only so many authorities to do what you need to do. So I would say I would highly encourage a solution, like an MOU, MOA between SOCOM and Army CI Command. The other thing is, man, get it done. Personalities, trust, relationships, integrate, partner, all those words that we talk about in our projects together, Mike. Things get done through trust and relationships. And we have SOF has counterintelligence assets all over the world, and Army CI Command is primarily here in the United States, but now all over the world as well. So it all starts with those personal relationships, and that's how you get to the point of trusting one another to do what needs to be done. I can understand the viewpoint from both sides on well, this person doesn't want to do this, or this person doesn't want us to do that. Look, at the end of the day, if we don't work together, that's kind of like, I think back to after 9/11 in the Joint Terrorism Task Force concept, being in a room full of 30 different agencies at the Washington field office. There are agencies there that truly did not like each other. But at the end of the day, this was no longer agency X and agency Y. It was, Bobby and Billy, and your cubicle mates now. Your cube mates and You're going out answering, suspicious incident calls together. You're putting your lives at risk together. So at the end of the day, we all have to cooperate. Otherwise, we're in for a world of hurt. Our country has to focus on this major. I call it the fight of our generation. I thought the war on terror was going to be the fight of our generation, but the fight we have now against China, again, I'll call it out and call it as I see it, in Russia. I think the saying was China first, Russia always in the Pentagon. That was our go-to, but we got to find a way to work together, and I believe it can be done. And whether it's a bureaucratic response or a personal initiatives, I think there's a way to get to mutual respect and partnership and trust.
I completely agree. The pacing challenge, as outlined in the National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy of China, is evident. I mean, we sit there and we look at how China has infiltrated every aspect of our of U.S. economy, every aspect of our political system, every aspect of our R&D and our academia. And if we do not come together as a whole of government and put our small bickering and fiefdoms aside and work together and partner, be it from your respective, under your respective authorities and your mission sets. If you look across the U.S. government and all the different partners, we have the authorities, we have the ability to impose costs, we have the ability to actually save our way of life, because that's what we're talking about, is a existential threat that is trying to dismantle and destroy the American way of life and the current world order. They want to re-image the world order in the PRC and Russia's image. And if we don't take that seriously, then we are in for a world of hurt. And what we saw in World War II and the Cold War does not pale in comparison to what we're going to see under this authoritarian regime and their ideals. We've seen what they do to their ethnic populations. We see what they do to their own citizens during the COVID pandemic, locking them up and letting them, the virus, decimate their elderly population, which was help their GDP. I mean, their GDP grew by 5% as a result of their actions. But how many people had to suffer and die as a result of it? If we don't wake up and stop infighting and stop trying to jockey for position, it doesn't matter who gets the win, as long as it's an American or as long as it's an allied partner win. So
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I kind of, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see me talking about the awakening. The awakening is upon us, and I think, and not just in the government. I think the American population, and people talk. I think it's one of the most overused things in the whole of government, whole of nation. For the longest time, you kept hearing that, but you weren't seeing any evidence of a whole of government or whole of nation. But now it's you're starting to see it, and I, you got to start coming out from behind the curtain and letting people know what the threats are. I just saw, I was just checking my LinkedIn feed this morning and was going to comment just before we started our call. But I'm looking at the recent case that hit. It's just on national. NCSC put some, on this day in history, talking about cases, espionage cases. They've done a really good job of letting the American public know what's going out there. The FBI has done a tremendous job of talking about, lifting the curtain and talking about the cases that are going on in the country. You had never seen this before. I mean, in the counterintelligence world, man, nobody would ever mention any of this stuff in the media. I talk about Army counterintelligence, and I say, the last several years of my service, I forget the number of cases that we brought to some sort of resolution where, in some cases, investigations would go on for years and years, and the senior leaders start asking, how much longer are we going to be doing this? So we took a kind of taking a play out of the terrorism playbook in my time with the FBI and on JTTFs and at the national JTTF. There's ways to get people off the battlefield without a prosecution or without arresting them for espionage. That's a pretty high bar to prove elements of espionage, or so there's ways to start, because you're not going to prosecute your way out of this. This is not going to be that. It's not like dealing with the mob or locking everybody up. You got to start naming and shaming. You just got to start getting everybody's awareness. Nobody wanted to talk about supply chain risk management back in 2017, 2018, 2019. It wasn't until Operation Warp Speed and the pandemic, and all of a sudden people couldn't get, spare parts for their car or whatever. Now supply chain is on everybody's, it's a dinner table topic. So these things are becoming more important to every household in America, and understanding the threat we're facing right now. So back to the soft CI assets. I say there's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. I guarantee you there are some pockets of excellence out there for whatever SF group or whatever entity within the soft CI community. They're making things happen, and that's all based on relationships and trust. So hopefully it will continue in a positive trend.
The news articles and the feeds that are coming out are just astonishing at how much information. I mean, the FBI counterintelligence division publishing indictment after indictment after indictment, almost on a daily basis, of subversion, espionage, seditious activities, improper export control use, and that's what a lot of them are getting on, especially on the RDA side, is violations and export controls. Which, hey, great. Let's use Commerce. Let's use HSI. Let's use all these other agencies' authorities to impose costs. Like I said, it doesn't have to be Army up there touting, or SOF or DOD up there touting, hey, we got to win. It's, hey, our partner got to win, and we get to reap the benefits of that win. I mean,
Team America won. That's all that matters. And one of my, I had, anybody that knows me, I had a lot of go-to favorite sayings, and one of them was, hey, if you wanted applause, you should have joined the circus. Because counterintelligence is not one area or one career field that you're going to seek out recognition for everything you do. So it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if the bad guy loses, that's a win for Team America. So,
and a lot of times the American populace isn't even going to know that the bad guy is losing, because we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're being those silent professionals. We're being those vanguards of national security, and we're protecting America's interests and our partners and allies' interests. But if we don't come together and we don't work together, then we've already lost. So, last word to you.
I gotta say, I appreciate the time and the opportunity to share my thoughts with you, and for those that watch this video. I am 100% still committed to being value added to this community. It's been an honor to serve, in government for 3 decades. Still got a lot of gas left in the tank, and that's the one thing for the Simon Group. What our focus is, we have a lot of individuals much like me and like you. You're on your second career. We still want to find a way to contribute, and motivated, still motivated. We're all motivated to help. You can't have that much expertise in counterintelligence, walk out the door, never to be heard and seen from again. So we are committed to helping our clients, both in the private sector and government space, to bring that expertise to whoever needs it and wherever it's needed the most. So thanks again for the opportunity, Mike. I appreciate it.
No, definitely appreciate your service. appreciate you taking the time to help get the word out, educate on Army CI reform, what it is, what it isn't, and how it is a value added to the enterprise as well as the department and the nation. And like Chris Costa said in the interview that I had with him, we have to be able to leverage those graybeards. We have to be able to reach back into those CI professionals from decades past and try to really look at how we're doing our activities and ensure CI is integrated early, often, and always. We have to get left of theft, because otherwise our way of life is but a distant glimmer, and we're not destined to win this, as Chris said. So as we look back historically, education across the CI field, when it came to being able to talk to other Army personnel about the threats, they use the acronym SIADA, Subversion and Espionage Directed Against the United States Army. Did those in-person briefs or that online training. We transitioned over to the Threat Awareness and Reporting Program shortly after I came into counterintelligence, and that was heavily focused on the counterterrorism threat. The radicalization piece module came out shortly after the Fort Hood shooting with Nidal Hasan. What was some of the genesis behind that shift from SIADA to TARP? Was it 9/11? Was it the counter VEO fight, or was it some other effort that was trying to modernize how we reach our force?
Great question, Mike. So I can tell you with very intimate knowledge and personal experience, TARP was born as a result of the 2009 shooting at Fort Hood. And because I know it intimately, my assignment at the time, I was at the National Joint Terrorism Task Force. As a matter of fact, it was my first day on the job as I was selected to serve as the deputy chief of the NJTTF for the DoD portfolio there on the task force, 40 different agencies. And the Fort Hood shooting by Nidal Hasan just opened up a whole different level of concern. I'll never forget, the Tannberg ran off the hook in my office, the G2 at the time, and the G2X, and Army leaders, across the service. But when you look at in kind of the postmortem, yeah, sorry, no pun intended there. When you look at the postmortem after Fort Hood, the shooting, and you look at all the indicators that were there, that were presented by Nidal Hasan, because when you go and you look at the interviews of the people that knew him, and what we knew of him after the attack in Fort Hood, those comments, those observations probably would have never been reported, and obviously were not reported. Some actually, no, none were reported. They were observed, but nobody ever reported them. When you look at the legacy SIADA, again, built for your Cold War, send their spies, recruiting people inside headquarters to get their secrets, subversion and espionage directed against the Army. It was time. Nidal Hasan in the shooting at Fort Hood definitely identified a gap in the Army threat awareness, the need for more awareness as it pertains to these types of threats. So that I was not involved in the writing of the rewriting of TARP, the TARP regulation, but was consulted on it quite a bit because of the information I had access to from the FBI investigation on Nidal Hasan, and the comments that were being made by people that knew and worked alongside him, and the fact that he was in communication with Anwar al-Awlaki 16 or 17 different times over the course of a year and a half. And, it's in hindsight, the Army should have known about that. Army counterintelligence should have known about that. But there was a breakdown in communication for whatever reason. Not going to, relitigate that or, discuss those issues. But the TARP regulation came about as a direct result of the Fort Hood shooting. Look, when I talked about Anwar al-Awlaki to the Army leadership, nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew who he was. I mean, hey, here you have an American citizen who was radicalizing individuals online. And, nobody really took him seriously until you started seeing the results of his efforts of, getting folks to self-radicalize. So the TARP regulation was a direct result, in my opinion, in timing. When you go look at the timing, I forget when it was published, I think 2010, maybe 2011. But it was a direct result of the Fort Hood shooting, no doubt, because of the lessons learned and because of the things that we, the Army, missed from people that were around him every day. And what indicators, if you go look at the table in the back, the chart, the indicators, those weren't a thing, 40 years ago during the Saida days. It was just a different world, different threat, and good on the Army on getting that rewritten as quickly as possible and incorporating those lessons learned and those indicators that we spent a long time looking at in the course of my career, certainly looking for those radicalized service members, family members. I mean, even family members overseas. I had a couple of cases that were self-radicalizing, but they were living on Army installations. So. I think it was a good thing for the Army to update that, but it's continues to be updated, and that's the beauty of regulation and policy. You can always change. So,
well, yes, it was a great move forward for the Army. It filled that gap, especially on the counter VEO CT side of the house, because one of those national security crimes that we talked about that we do investigate is terrorism. So making sure that we are educating the force on how people become self-radicalized or radicalized by not only violent extremist organizations, but also criminal organizations and other things that are willing to use that force to achieve their goals. You go back to some of the Cold War era organizations and how they promoted violence to achieve their goals. I sat there and I'm in the process of reading this book, Spies, Lies, and Exiles, the extraordinary story of the Russian double agent George Blake by Simon Cooper. I find it very interesting because a lot of the insights and the indicators of his espionage activities and his rationale and why he committed his betrayal of the British MI5 and MI6 and their intelligence apparatus during the Cold War is extraordinary. I think the Army may need to relook at the threat awareness and reporting program as it pertains to how people become radicalized, not just from violent extremists, but also potentially ideological causes similar to what we've seen in our political arena with individuals siding with the Chinese, siding with Russian and other communist nations and socialist nations against the U.S. So when it comes to looking at some of those ideological causes, I think the radicalization piece has its merit, but it might need to be broadened to look at other ideological factors and what causes people like Ana Montes, who just got released from prison after serving 25 years for working on behalf of the Cuban intelligence apparatus during the Cold War and betraying our DIA brethren and getting a number of sources killed by her actions. How do we identify that? How do we identify those Peter Devins that are groomed and put into the military through the accessions process and tracked by those foreign intelligence security services to infiltrate and get into positions of key national security interests that then we find years, decades later, after all the harm has been done. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I hate to oversimplify it, but I tend to do that from time to time. And I think so when you look at how long it took, how long the SAIDA regulation was in place, and it took a catastrophic event, a watershed moment, if you will, a watershed event in November 5th of 2009, for the Army to kind of shake off their regulations, say, oh, hey, when's the last time we updated this? What did we miss? What are the things? I mean, it's kind of, I guess, scientific to kind of go through the process and say, what are the things that we, the Army as a community, identified in indicators or activities or behavior of Nidal Hasan, and let's cross-reference them against the list of things that we say are indicators of in our current regulation. And when you do that, you're going to find a delta there, and you're going to say, oh, wait, wow, we need to add this. We need to make sure this is there. We need to, and that's through a normal process, and policy is constantly being looked at and updated. It's not the most desirable job to have in the Army and Army CI for that matter. But I'll tell you, if you want to affect change in the Army CI community, everybody that came to work with me in the G2 and the Army CI, the CI division, I told them, if you came here, if you've been talking about change in the Army, you came to the right place. This is where it starts, through policy, because that's what we do here: policy, programming, budget, and execution. So I look at the regulation. Maybe it's a good time to look at the TARP regulation now. Again, it's been a day, it's been a decade or so, to say, is it addressing the current threats that the Army faces right now? Probably could use some tweaking. But I would also say, if I were in the field, if Special Agent Simon was still in the field, I would also be looking for, you talk about proactive, I talk about proactive counterintelligence, defensive counterintelligence. It's awareness. You're a cop on the beat. You're going out and talking to your covered population. You need to be aware of the things that the adversary is doing. And just because it's not in a pre-canned briefing, that at one time you actually had to be certified to give a TARP briefing. You remember those good old days? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
So you're limiting yourself. If you have 1,000 badges in the field, and if you only have 500 that are certified, I would do air quotes, but I'm video, so I wouldn't do that. It didn't make any sense to me. As an agent, you should be able to go out there and give a briefing to your population. You are there to help them be aware of what suspicious looks like. And I would say, don't be tied to a regulation. Don't be tied to a video that's pre-canned or staying close within, to the message. You're not going to deviate and a major departure from what the message is. But you need to be aware of what the adversary is doing. You need to be aware of what non-traditional collectors are. That if your covered population or your supported unit has no idea of what a non-traditional collector is, boy, they're eating our lunch. But I bet you if you go look at TARP, it's not in there. Non-traditional collector is not in there. The regulation hasn't caught up, and it's difficult for it to stay caught up in time with current events and current trends. So as an agent, for all the agents out there talking to your supported elements, be aware of what the threat is. Be aware of what the adversary is doing. They're telling us what they're doing. The adversary is telling us what they're doing. We need to be able to share that with our covered population, both in the private sector and in the government, our government agencies. So, yeah, I think the TARP regulation, not for me to say, but it probably could use a dusting off and updating. But at the end of the day, all the agents out there doing agent things, be aware of the threat, be aware of what the indicators are, and share that with your covered population. And just say, hey, when in doubt, just call me,
No, I completely agree that the threat continually morphs, continually changes. So if our doctrine, our policy, and our education for the force is not able to be rapidly updated through lessons learned or through recent needed changes, like what you said, no collectors, not in the regulation, not in the directive. The fact that you are regimented to stick to the approved slides and only the approved slides, I think is a disservice when those slides are not staying up with the trends. They're not staying up with the constant flow of information that the FBI is putting out, that our sister services are putting out, that our partners and allies are putting out. The media is constantly highlighting the threat. And if we're not able to converse with the audience or the force on these issues and meet them where they're at and where their concerns are, then we're already tying our hands behind our back and trying to fight a multi-front war. And this is a war. It is a war in the shadows. And ultimately, we have to do more. We have to take the gloves off. We need to be able to put our adversaries back on their heels, punch them in the nose, proverbially, and make them think twice about their actions. Make them waste the resources. Make them waste the funds and the time to go back and relook their plans or relook their activities, because, like you said, publicly shaming, causing them to second guess what they're doing or how they're approaching a specific target or how they're exploiting a specific vulnerability, being able to be proactive rather than reactive. I know we talk about the sword and the shield, and historically, CI has been the shield. We have historically just sat there and just taken beating after beating after beating rather than trying to impose cost and taking the fight to them. So if you have any comments on how to be more offensive and proactive in our approach, I welcome.
Yeah, again, I would preface this by saying I need to be careful about what I say, because I am no longer in the position I was several years ago. But I would say this: that building or reforming Army CI for the future, one of the things that I stressed was we need to be more proactive. We need to be a little more aggressive, and we need to let our adversaries know that we know who they are. We need to engage them when and where we can in a very coordinated and very synchronized manner, not just go, guns blazing across the countryside. But I said we need to send a message that the Army Counterintelligence, soon to be command, or just Army Counterintelligence in general. That was another thing about reform, establishing an identity. You hear people say ACI. Well, that started maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We said ACI, we need to let the adversary know that ACI is here. They're no longer going to walk into our conventions in, Washington, D.C., AUSA. It's, the Super Bowl for the acquisition community. And, we know with high confidence that there are a lot of people that attended those things to look for ways to acquire our technology or get a foothold in their efforts of doing so. But I said we need to start engaging them proactively. We need to allow them to know. We need to let them know that ACI is not ACI of old. We are here. There are ways of doing things without seeking all different types of authorities that people would consider. When you say the word offensive, that means something in the counterintelligence world, and you have to be very careful there. So it's just essentially just proactive counterintelligence, letting people know who we are, both red and blue. Let them know who we are, and let them know what we're here for. And again, it's all part of the awakening that's happening. And I know that they have done that. Army CI has done that. They did it. They implemented that mindset during my tenure, and I hope and I suspect it's continuing. So there's a lot of, the imagination. We're pretty creative people in coming up with ways to disrupt a non-traditional collector or foreign intelligence officer without having to get authorities from, levels so high that would further complicate things. So a lot of different ideas, a lot of different things but I'll just, why talk about it? Because I know MSS will be watching this shortly. We don't want to give them our playbook, but agents are agents and they do agent things, and they're very very creative, given the authorities that they have, and let them go and do great things.